So again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this, and we are going to try to not take too much of your time. But to our audience who are watching from all the platforms that we have available, um, just a couple of house rules before we continue. The first one is this is a webinar. It is not an open discussion forum like we normally have. And so we have a couple of basic rules that we are going to adhere to. The first one is that please remain muted. The panelists will have different opportunities to speak. And so the audience, if you can please remain muted, and at any given time, the question and answer section is open to you. Feel free to post a comment, a question, or whatever suggestion you have on there. We'll be able to get access to those and have a conversation about them. We want to do this as professional as possible. As you all know, we are gearing to building a professional and well-run country in Ambazonia. So without wasting too much of your time, I am going to we're going to dive in with the program for today. And the first thing we're going to do, of course, all of you that are here know about the Bank of Ambazonia. Now, the Bank of Ambazonia was started a couple of years ago to put in place to discuss financial issues as far as the revolution and the future country of Ambazonia is concerned. And with us today is the board chairman of the Bank of Ambazonia. I am going to be introducing him shortly. And while I do that, you will get to meet the esteemed uh, board chairman of the bank. So, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm going to call on Dr. Akbo, if you can pull up his picture for me, I'm going to introduce to you the chairman of the Bank of Ambazonia, who is none other than Dr. Ako Asana. Most of you are familiar with his great work, but let me give you a proper introduction of this distinguished gentleman. Dr. Asana is the pioneer governor of the Bank of Ambazonia. He is currently the Dean of School of Art and Sciences and an AW Mellon Fellow who has written extensively, including on the Ambazonian conflict. Dr. Asana is a winner of the PTK Distinguished College Administration Award and received the Certificate of Special Congressional Recognition for the outstanding and invaluable service to the community. And this is not just about the community where he resides, this is about the communities outside of his immediate residency and place of work. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Dr. Asana, who is going to be giving us a welcoming word. Dr. Asana, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jess. Fellow Ambazonians, we did not ask for this war, but since this war was imposed upon us, we're asking for the one thing that can bring us peace, and that is for the complete decolonization and the restoration of the independence of British Southern Cameroons. For this reason, we would like to send a message to La République du Cameroon and its agents that Ambazonia will be free again. And La République du Cameroon has only two choices. They can go back to the negotiation table in Canada and work on a peaceful separation, or they can continue down this violent path of genocide against Ambazonia. In the words of Honorable Wilbur, the time has come and our people have risen. And even if you took all the French army and added them to yours, you will never bring us down. The longer this war lasts, the greater our commitment to resist. International law grants monetary sovereignty to each state with the right to choose which currency it will use. Monetary sovereignty includes essentially the exclusive rights for a given state, like the right to issue a currency, coins, banknotes, a legal tender within the territory, the right to determine and change the value of that currency, and the right to regulate the use of that currency or any other currency within its territory. That is why in Southern Cameroon, we used to use the pound sterling until we were colonized by La République du Cameroun. Under international law, the right to issue a currency in a territory may be exercised by the state that has sovereignty over that territory. But what is of greater relevance to us today is the fact that international law recognizes that in times of war, an occupied nation may issue its own currency. This is what happened during the American Revolution, in Germany during the Allied occupation, and in Iraq in 2003. We can unilaterally change our currency. By declaring our independence in 2017, we regain our monetary sovereignty. There is a powerful school of thought among some Ambazonians that we cannot and should not plan for the future of Ambazonia while still in the middle of a liberation war. Ambazonians are not a monolithic people, so we have many different opinions. This school of thought holds that we should wait until we get to Buea. Then at that point, everything will magically fall in place. And only at that time can we then start the work of drafting a constitution, drawing an economic and monetary policy, designing a public health system, or even discussing the currency. So, although that school of thought shares the view that the restoration of our independence is important, they have a very single and fixed mindset, which we support, to fight for nothing short of our complete decolonization. But as much as we would like to agree with this school, at this point in time, unfortunately, we live in a complex and modern world in which we cannot avoid, nor can we afford to focus only on one thing at a time. History shows that we do not have the luxury of time on our hands. In fact, in the 1950s, when our forebears should have been discussing strategies to safeguard our independence, they were told to wait until the United Nations decided on the plebiscite questions. In the 1950s, when our leaders should have been discussing strategies to safeguard the independence of Southern Cameroon, they were told to wait until the Fumban Conference. In the 1960s, when it was obvious that Ahidjo was violating the federal constitution, instead of our leaders discussing how to leave that God-forsaken union, they were busy waiting to be appointed into cabinet positions by La République du Cameroun. So please, excuse this generation of Ambazonians who have decided that enough is enough. We will never be caught unprepared again. It is never too early to start building plans for Ambazonia. Preparing for the restoration of Ambazonia is like preparing for the birth of a new child or a new nation. We cannot afford to focus only on the pregnancy and then forget that the goal is to have a successful live birth. And like we do when preparing to welcome a new baby, we must put in place all the necessary things that the baby will need to grow up healthy. And just like we prepare for a new baby, so too we must prepare for the birth and restoration of Ambazonia by discussing a future currency, the structure of government. Do we go back to a parliamentary system of government, or do we go to a presidential system of government? The limitations of the power of government. In this modern world, Ambazonians must be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Or as we say back home, Ambazonians must be able to drink and chew kola nuts at the same time. We also do not want to repeat the mistakes of many freedom fighters all over the world who were accused of focusing solely on the fighting that they forgot that fighting was merely a means to an end. We must prepare for the day when this fighting will stop, even while we are in the middle of the liberation struggle. We must never forget that the ultimate goal of this revolution is not just simply to restore an independent Ambazonia, but one that will never ever be colonized again, either by outsiders or by its own people. The goal of all this fighting and sacrifices is to create an independent Ambazonia in which our people are guaranteed certain basic and inalienable rights and dignities, like the right to freely assemble, to protest against their government, the right to have access to health care, a livable environment, the right to own and manage our own currency, the right to not be discriminated against nor dispossessed of our properties. We are fighting, fellow Ambazonians, so that our sons and daughters will not have to undertake the perilous journey across the Sahara in search of greener pastures in Europe, or traverse the jungles of South America in search of a sea road to the United States. We are fighting because we no longer want to live in a failed state. And that is why the planning for the future must start right now. If we want a democratic Ambazonia, we must start practicing it today, even in the middle of the revolution. If we want a vibrant Ambazonian economy and a currency, we must start discussing those ideas today. We must prepare for the day, for that day when this fighting will stop. We cannot afford to wait until all the weapons are dropped. Fellow Ambazonians, we will not repeat the mistakes nor ignore the lessons from the Sudanese Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005 and the challenges South Sudan faced and continue to face with regards to its currency. Therefore, Ambazonia is preparing for the day after this war ends. In this regard, we salute the efforts of all our valiant restoration forces who decided to not wait anymore, but to resist the occupiers. And as they continue to demonstrate to the world and to our colonizers that we shall never surrender. We salute the memories and families of all who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in this struggle. We salute our leadership in detention who have remained resolute despite the dehumanizing treatment that they continue to receive. We salute all innocent Ambazonians languishing in jails across La République du Cameroon. Your sacrifices will never be forgotten. Today's conference is a major step towards planning for a post-conflict Ambazonia. It is simply one step. We invite all stakeholders in the Amber Revolution to continue or to start working on plans and together to help create a vision of what we dream for Ambazonia. The distinguished panel of speakers who are gathered here today have come to help us build that dream of what the currency of a free, democratic, and economically independent Ambazonia will be. May God bless all the sons and daughters of Ambazonia, wherever they may be, and may God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that succinct introduction to why we're having this virtual conference on the development of currencies in West Africa, specifically around exiting the CFA. I think that as an Ambazonian myself and many of us that are here, I totally agree with you that we cannot be one-dimensional while we are in this struggle. We need to be thinking about the future. We need to be planning for the future. We need to be putting things in place so that when we do and we shall have our independence, we will be ready to take the country and run with. And I think one of the things that most people do not might have missed is the fact that even when the US was fighting for independence from Britain, they had what they call a continental currency, which they created to fund the to fund the war of independence for the US. This was not because they could not continue using the British pound that was in existence, but this was also an act of independence in itself. And Ambazonia needs to learn the good lessons, things that speaks to our overall goal and objective, and try to start having conversations that will help us achieve them. And yes, we really do not want to be South Sudan in the next 20, 30 years, because like you indicated, they had their independence almost 2 decades ago, but it was only in 2018 that they were able to have the South Sudanese pound. And that you can tell that took them more than, I don't know, 12, 14 years for them to be able to come up with a currency of their own. The irreparable damage that would have done to the South Sudanese economy and ability to deal with other countries as an independent nation as far as the economy is concerned cannot really be explained in this conversation. So thank you so much to say that Ambazonians cannot continue to miss opportunities that allow them to be better, to do better, to learn lessons, and make sure that they do not repeat mistakes that have been repeated before. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that you are really looking forward to hearing from our panelists. Um, and I don't think that I can add anything to why we are here. The chairman has spoken to that. The reasons are clear. Just like we're preparing for the birth of Ambazonia, we need to do everything. You cannot say, I'm going to get the baby's bed. I'll just take care of the pregnancy and then I will get the clothing when the baby's here. No, it doesn't work like that. You get the clothing of the baby, you get the bed, you get everything set up, you get a feeding bottle before the baby is born. That is exactly what Ambazonia should be doing. We are putting in place everything so that when the baby is here, you just focus on grooming the baby and let the baby grow. So thank you, Mr. Dr. Asana, Chairman. Um, okay, so before I continue and go to our panelists, there is I would like to first of all um, explain the fact that we have some really distinguished panelists on here today, and I am so looking forward, and I'm sure as well as most of you to listening to them. Um, in as much as we're having these conversations as Ambazonians, it is not limited to just Ambazonia. We know that most of French Africa has really been looking forward to exiting safer. And so hopefully they will garner some courage from these conversations, and together we can achieve greater things. Before I go on to introduce the very distinguished panelists that we have on there, I want to put a disclaimer forward to say that the views that are expressed by our guests and panelists today at this conference are their personal views and do not in any way necessarily represent the views of the organizations they belong to or are affiliated with. Their participation at the conference today is also in no way an endorsement for our struggle for an independent Ambazonia. So I want to plead with Ambazonia that we keep that at the back of our minds to say these are personal views of experts on this topic, and that does not in any way represent organizations they are affiliated to or as a sign of support for our struggle. We do know what we are doing, and so thank you for that. Now I'm going to go on to introduce the distinguished panelists that we have on our screen right now. Almost everyone that is on this call would have, um, if you've never heard of Honorable Tibonagi in the revolution, the biggest friend and of Ambazonia, the biggest supporter of Ambazonia, then you need to read up a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. He's not just any panelist, but one that understands the struggle because of his past experiences. He is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs and this is a position he held between 2018 to 2021. He has co-authored a book titled Kiss Your Latte Goodbye, Managing Overseas Operations. I think I would love to read that book. The title of it sounds so interesting. And as a result of writing that book, he won an award. He won a winning award in nonfiction at the 2014 Paris Book Festival. Ambassador Thibault Nagy Jr. is currently serving as Vice Provost for International Affairs at the Texas Tech University. Honorable, thank you so much for always availing yourself to talk to us Ambazonians on any issue regarding our current state and future aspirations. Welcome, everyone, Honorable Thibault Nagy. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how prescient you were in organizing a conference about banking and finance this particular week when the whole world has been rocked by banking and financial scandals. So if you have any stock tips for me, please give them, send them to me my email, because I will definitely follow your lead on that. You guys are awesome. Obviously, I'm not a banker. I'm not an economist, so my remarks will be very, very brief. I am, however, a passionate advocate for justice for Ambazonians, Southern Cameroonians, who have been without any justice for many, many years. This comes to me from my own personal experience, because I was a victim of a very unjust regime growing up in communist Hungary. And then I spent many, many years when I came to the United States in our own diaspora, the Hungarian diaspora, that very much wished for freedom to come to our country, and God answered our prayers, and that did happen to us. So when I saw justice for my own people, that has really put in my heart a calling for justice for others who have been suffering the same. And I pray every day for justice and human rights for the people of Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. However, as many of you have heard me know, that I cannot take sides in independence versus federalism. I know very, very many good people on both sides. My passion is for a just outcome. My passion is that the people of Ambazonia or Southern Cameroons have their dignity and their human rights that are deserved and have been denied for so, so long. I also have said many times before that as long as the community remains divided on the leadership, on the mechanics for getting there, the destination is going to be very hard to achieve. So once again, my plea to the community is to please find at least one major point of unity, which all prominent individuals and which all groups can agree on. Now, that is not for any outsider to tell the community. That has to come from the community itself. But looking on as a passionate ally, from my point of view, perhaps one item that the community could be united on is a demand that there be an internationally recognized referendum, so that the people actually on the ground in Ambazonia, those who are suffering every day, can be the ones to determine their own future. We all know that the nation has suffered enough. We know that the people have suffered enough. But as a very wise American president said more than 150 years ago, I'm talking about President Abraham Lincoln, when he said that a house divided itself cannot stand. When he said that, he was, of course, repeating the words of an even more wise individual right from the Bible, that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Unfortunately, in Ambazonia, the house has not even begun to be constructed. So if it's hard enough to let a house stand that is divided, what can we expect for building a house? So that is my prayer to you, is for the community to please, please find one port of unity, so that those against you cannot keep exploiting that division and keeping you from achieving that dream. I thank you from the bottom of my heart to allow me to say a few words. I wish you every success with your conference, and God bless you, your families, Ambazonia, and all of Cameroon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Tibonagi. It's always, always a pleasure listening to you every chance we can. Every time I listen to you, I feel inspired as an Ambazonian. Um, and I think that what you just said, emphasizing on the need for unity amongst ourselves internally, is crucial. I think that is a point that we all acknowledge, and currently working on synergies to to ensure that that happens. And I think one of the things that people might not understand is that for you to have independence, you need to show the people what the future will look like, how different it will be. And so conversations like this are imperative as to what kind of financial outlook are we thinking as the people of Ambazonia. So while we might think this is premature, it is about the vision we have for our future country. And it is also a point of unity because we have experts in different fields who are just not sure how to contribute into the revolution. So when you create these conversations in different areas of specialization, you're bringing expertise and you're bringing vision and you're bringing unity to the people of Ambazonia. So to everyone that is sitting here, we have more that unites us than that which divides us. And so if we can just focus on those aspects that unite us, like Honorable just said, we will realize that those things that we even think divide us are irrelevant. So again, totally agree with you, Honorable. Thank you so much for always hammering on that. I know that sometimes it feels like our scores are really thick and things we don't listen, but I promise you that the message is going through and the people are working on. It might just not happen as fast as we really would have hoped, but we're definitely making inroads and some great progress there. And thank you. It is also due to your consistent call on that, consistent support of that. So we really appreciate that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to pass this over to my co-moderator. Most of you might not know him, so I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce him. Interestingly, he's an economist himself, and which is interesting. So I know him, but I didn't know he was an economist, you see. So I'm going to introduce him so we all know. And he's also a board member of the Bank of Ambazonia. And I'm talking about no one other than the Professor Julius Agbo. Now, if you do not know who Professor is, he is a tenured full professor of economics and finance at the Vanguard University of Southern California. He has been a former scholar at the Brookings Institute, Washington, D.C., and has also consulted for several organizations, including the United Nations, the World Bank, and the U.S. State Department Foreign Service Institute. Now, this distinguished gentleman did a research on the CFA franc zone and the political economy of development. And this research was published in peer-reviewed journals as well as in the New York Times. Amongst his scholarly contributions is a book chapter in the Oxford Handbook on Africa and Economics, co-edited by none other than Celestine Munger and Justin Lin, who is the former president of the World Bank. So we have skills, people. So let's use these skills, maximize this experience, and have conversations that are beneficial. So, Dr. Akbo, over to you. Professor Akbo, I'm sorry, my bad. Over to you.
Well, it doesn't really matter. Thank you so much, Jenny, for that generous introduction. And as I've never seen a moderator that is introduced that graciously, thank you so much. But I'm here to do moderation. So I'm bringing our next panelist. Our next panelist to give this opening remarks or what we call keynote speeches is Professor Mervyn Ayogo. Professor Mervyn Ayogo is a teaching professor of economics at Emory University right here in the US and a consultant to several international organizations. He was formerly a fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. We both served at the same time, and a former dean of the Faculty of Commerce at the University of Cape Town, Africa's topmost university. And I'm glad that I'm an alumni, and the board chairman of this bank is also an alumni of the University of Cape Town. Professor Ayogo has served as on a high-level panel of international experts on capital flights from Africa, resulting in a major contribution to the Oxford Handbook, Oxford University Press published book, Capital Flight from Africa. And another book, Africa's Odious Debts, How Foreign Loans and Capital Flight Bleed Africa. So this is somebody who knows what he's going to be talking about, as you know, all the other panelists. But yes, your turn, Professor Mervyn Ayogo. to deliver your keynote remarks.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction. It reminds me of the movie Caesar and Cleopatra. And when they were introduced as a bit of Rose, yeah, okay, defender of the walls. All protocols observed. In the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right in and make my few remarks. But first, I want to acknowledge Professor Aloysius Amin. I haven't seen him in over 20 years. It's a pleasure to see him at the panel, and I'm glad that he's looking well. He's an old soldier like me. We have an African saying that if you've been cooking for a long time, you tend to have plenty of broken pots. So I suppose my CV is very long because I'm very old, but with that age also comes a lot of experience. Speaking of experience, I've looked at, listened, and read the Q&A concerns and the comments that were made by the Honorable Governor Akasana, and also Jesse about why we should be aspirational. In Africa, we have a saying that you have to secure the ground before struggling for the bed or the mat. You're going to go on the ground. So there is some justification for the concern about sequencing. Should we be discussing this now? There's also a good justification for being aspirational, for taking a longer term look, because in building systems, sometimes the solutions are recursive. You work from back to the solution and vice versa. There is really no one specific way of approaching this. It's you model along. Evolution and creativity is very messy. There is no clear path, and it's in the discussion, sharing of ideas, disagreements, that new ideas come to our mind. In fact, on the basis of those concerns, I've reshaped the way that I want to open up this discussion. That being said, my remit this morning is to talk about possibilities frontier, almost like a dream. Can we have a currency, money that does what money does? Is that possible? And what do you do in the interim before the king comes? It's called interregnum. Before the king meaning sovereignty, but sovereignty in the sense of international recognition. Is it possible for a state to have money that does as money does before the rest of the world buys into that sovereignty? If you think about money, money is about systems. It's about networking, because first and foremost, it's a medium of exchange. It is a unit of accounting. It is a standard for deferred payment or a store of value. For it to do all that work, there are certain accessories, things that are necessary. And one of that is jurisdiction or fiat. That is an area which by law, force of law, that particular money is currency. Currency meaning it's acceptable by everybody. The second part is outside that area in which is acceptable, can it be traded? Is there any way of exchanging it? That's the other store of value and unit of account function. Because we all live in an interconnected world. And even if the state, Ambazonia, was to come into being, until there is a global recognition, you don't belong to the network. Often we talk about money, credit, and banking. So you've got money, you've got credit, then you've got the system within which this money and credit circulates to make it functional. If you have a telephone and nobody else has a telephone, it's useless. You can't call yourself. So if you have the installed base or the size of your network is what determines how valuable your currency is going to be. That is because there are different degrees of moneyness. Cash is at one extreme. At the other extreme are other forms of money that sometimes require clearing and settlement. Clearing means the recording and execution of a payment instruction. Settlement means transfer of value. And if money is a medium of exchange, sometimes you have to transfer value among residents in different jurisdictions. That's where that sovereignty issue comes into play. But it need not concern you if you belong to a network. However, if your network is limited, it becomes difficult for that currency to do that job. So my remit today is to tell you that Ambazonia is coming online at a time where those barriers to networking has greatly been reduced by the coming of the internet and the concept of virtual currency. You no longer have to wait until the powers that be smiles on you before you can join the network. And by the way, in networking, there are hierarchies. The major leagues interconnect. The minor leagues have to discuss access issues. Okay. But because of the internet and the fact that we now have what is called the distributed ledger system, where you no longer even need a centralized authority to benchmark your currency, it is quite possible, that's my message today, for you, even when you have secured that ground, we were talking about fighting for the match when you don't have the ground. But even when you have secured the ground, there are still this battle traditionally before the advent of the internet and the virtual currency and the distributed ledger system that now makes it possible for you not to even queue into the major league for your currency to be able to tap into the network. In other words, there are now what the Honorable Ambassador knows about is back channels of communication, even in diplomacy. So now the back channels are so strong that a new state, before it gets into the regular traditional access, can actually begin to benchmark the value of its currency through that networking system. But I want to say that a magician usually tells you not to ask them to explain their tricks. So how this works, please don't ask me, but I'm sure that the governor of the Bank of Ambazonia understands this. I am here to assure you that it's doable. And I know what I'm talking about because I joined banking in 1974. I was thinking about it 50 years. I'm a professional banker, I'm an economist, my PhD is in money and banking, and I'm an Igbo man, so I understand money. Believe me, this is possible. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Hugo. Just hang in there with me. I just want to say this is very interesting. And I like the way your presentation was very simple. You tried these very technical conversations, but you try to keep it at the level of anyone on the street. You avoided the use of jargons, which are very common. I know you were talking about decentralized finance here, and the new world global monetary system that is basically decentralized. We have a decentralized architecture. It means you don't really need any permission. It's permissionless. Anyone can use it. It is also a decentralized governance system, which means it is censorship resistant. No one can stop it. It also means there is decentralized trust. And the key point that I got him saying that in the current system, the traditional system that has prevailed for over a century now is built entirely on trust. But with this new norm, the new global financial system that we are getting, there is decentralized trust. It is open. Anyone can verify the execution of a transaction, and we don't need trust in the system for it to work. So it is kind of like an aircraft when it's already settled in the air, it is now on autopilot. So these are very important, insightful things. And it's really a new day, bright day that is looking forward for states that are in formation or hoping to be formed, or fragile states. Just a last note before you leave, what advice in terms of state building? I know you tried to address that already, the concern of some that, oh, let's wait until we get our independence, political independence and territorial independence before we start talking about this. The sequencing thing, you had addressed it. But again, once more, some of our people are talking about going to economy by barter. I don't know whether you can just show them how, before this system that we don't agree is working working very well because it's based entirely on trust, is so centralized. It was better than barter. So we cannot move because this system is failing, go back to the worst instead of going back to the best. Or going forward to the best? It's your last note that I want to hear, Professor Melvin, before we let you go. We know you have another topic.
Okay. All right. It's very important. There are still limits to what you can do in the money, credit, and banking system without having sovereignty, because you still need to clearing and settlement system, and for that you really need institutions, the power of the state, to enforce those contractual obligations that come from clearing and settlement. However, until you get to that point, the ultimate point of either connecting with the clearinghouse interbank payment systems and the FedWire, or the target system, which is the Euro system for clear international payments and international trade. There are different levels of moneyness, as I said, cash at one extreme and credit at the other extreme. Now, you know that cash has payment finality. There is no need for further negotiation, but it's also very awkward for bulk transactions. So the more your economy grows and you move into industrialization and commercial activities, you need the other degree of moneyness. You need virtual currencies, e-money, credit, for instance, where banks actually, and that's where banks become important. These are like accessories. The state is an accessory to the financial system. Accessory meaning tools that enable us. Banks, non-bank and non-bank financial intermediaries are also enablers. But those are things that need the power of the state. This is why in development, we talk about state and market. So there's really a limit to how robust and the exchange mechanism, that is the medium of exchange function, that the system, the financial system they're trying to create, can provide without that backing of the power of the state. Yeah. So it becomes an evolutionary process. The more the states acquire that power to enforce contracts, sometimes the contractual enforcement can be what it used to be in the old days, where it's really integrity, coming back to the trust element you say. And it's called local exchange economy. For instance, you walk into a casino, they issue tokens. But as long as it's in that casino and there's an exchanger where you can cash in, people are very happy to exchange those tokens and use it in doing business. But that casino is an institution because there are legal enforcement within the bigger section. Yeah. So the questions you raise, whether we will barter at the moment or whether there's a credit system or some degree of moneyness, is really a question about the degree of statehood, the evolution. Okay. If you live in a very small community where the village chief or even the youth do the enforcement, we have SUSU and those cooperative systems whereby you don't sign any contract, but if you owe me money or I come to help you in your farm and you don't reciprocate, I go and report you.
Got you.
You have ways of enforcing. So Ambazonia, as it evolves, your credit system, the robustness will also evolve. So I wouldn't worry too much about these things. These are one of those things that are endogenous. to the state formation. I hope, I don't want to, I keep trying to hold myself back because I'm technical. The more you can break it down, the more people see that there's nothing hidden, that this is really, it's a matter of commitment of an Ambazonia. And you will make the possible, the impossible possible, as Nelson Mandela said.
Absolutely. I know you have very limited time, and that's why we let you bring your intervention right now.
Yeah.
And in fact, your point is so valid in the sense that we know that cryptocurrency, it was called virtual currencies in the 1990s. It was actually the path that Brazil used to come out of hyperinflation.
Right.
They had to create a virtual currency
Right.
and kind of transform people's trust from the fiat currency to a virtual currency
Right.
and beat inflation. And so we can think about that in real time. Professor Melvin, you have two questions from from Dr. Attorney Harmony Bolton. I don't know which one of them you want to answer, given your limited time. Let me read
I'll take both.
one.
I'll take both, but I also want to quickly point out something that I had promised that I didn't want to go into the details of how the Bank of Ambazonia can strengthen its position because it's still subject to sabotage. You know, we have to be very strategic about it. So when I hold back on saying things, it's the lesson I've learned from political economy. We always say, if you want to reform, the politicians must not see it coming. Otherwise, they will checkmate you and the reform will never happen. So I have very good strategic and tactical reasons for sometimes holding on what I want to disclose in such an open discussion. But go ahead, yeah, ask the question. I just wanted to preface, because if I'm not ducking and diving, I have a reason for why sometimes I keep it quiet. Yeah.
You're a wise man. All right. So the questions are, and again, the next speaker can follow up on some of them if you want to, given your limited time. But the one maybe that I want to bring to your attention is the second one. Do you think it will be smarter for Ambazonia to join ECOWAS when hopefully the betrayal of Ouattara is cleared? When hopefully the betrayal of Ouattara is cleared and the ECO becomes a West African currency. The first one was what are your thoughts about the neo-colonial franc CFA as a tool against our economic lack of control, which are a lot of points that I think Ali would be driving into in this conversation, but feel free to answer since the question is up to you.
Okay. The first one is about the STIFA. And I want to say that it's always been an embarrassment to us that our money is in France, in Paris. It's overdue, and I couldn't even believe that it's lasted this long. It reminds me of a question, it's a joke. Somebody said, what is the capital of Kenya? And they said it's Switzerland, because that's where all our money is, capital of life. So what is the capital of Francophone West Africa? It's Paris. We don't want that. Yeah, you know, talk about regional, sub-regional sovereignty. We haven't even secured that if we continue to leave the money. So it's not even a point for discussion. You know, it's a point for embarrassment. Let me leave it at that. Yeah. And I'm glad that we're beginning to broach that issue. Second, the question of joining ECOWAS, if you look at the regional economic communities in Africa, it's like a spaghetti. You know, sometimes I don't know if SADC is in COMESA or COMESA is in SADC, where, but it's okay. The point I mean is, the more networks you join, it can't be bad. In fact, there's a movie in the US, it's called Chicken Run. And the punchline in that movie was, in the final analysis, the farmhand says to the owner, I told you they were organized. This is like Animal Farm. The chickens got together and overthrew the tyrannical human being. So the power of organization, the power of network cannot be underestimated. Okay, join ECOWAS, join anybody who would have you. And if there are no benefits, you can always unjoin. But please do not shy away into joining economic communities. Mighty is strength. You know, in this country, it says, "Out to reduce honor." Among the many, one. So unity is in strength. And we need the trading networks. I've already talked about networks and the power of this installed base system.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Ayugo, and thank you so much for accepting this invitation. And you can feel free to hang in there as long as you have more time. We will now take our next panelist. We'll bring in our next keynote speaker in the person of Dr. Ali. Dr. Ali Zafar. Just quickly doing a lot of things. Okay, Dr. Ali Zafar is here with us. 1 second, I'll bring an introduction to him before we go further. So Dr. Ali is a global macroeconomist and private sector specialist. One second. Right, so he's been a consultant to the African Development Bank. He's currently, I believe, a consultant to the African Development Bank, formerly a senior economist at the International Financial Corporation, which is an arm of the World Bank, and formerly consultant to the United Nations, the Gates Foundation, and USAID. Ali is the author of a groundbreaking book, The CFA Franc Zone Economic Developments and Post-COVID Recovery, published in 2021. The book is currently on Amazon, and one that everyone who is interested in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa development must read, written for the average reader on the street, not technical. And one that many of you are academics here would need to recommend to your library for the study of Africa, because he's rewriting, quote unquote, the political economy of development in Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in Francophone Africa, where he has traveled extensively. He knows all the countries that he's talking about. So on that note, make welcome Dr. Ali Zafar. It's over to you, sir.
Julius, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I don't know much about the politics of Ambazonia, but I wish you all peace and justice. I will focus my intervention on the macroeconomics and the CFA franc zone.
And Ali, before you continue, maybe I interrupt you again and make the disclaimer that all the views expressed at this conference by our panelists and guest speakers are their personal views, and they do not represent the views of the organizations that they work with currently or previously. And participation at this conference is not an endorsement of Ambazonian independence. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So the franc zone is an anomaly of history. It was created in the 1940s as a kind of way for France to cement the post-colonial relationship, post-independence relationship with both Central and West Africa. And when I arrived in the franc zone 2 decades ago, I was quite surprised by this arrangement as an independent macroeconomist. If we read the work of Catherine Schenck, many of the other zones in history have disappeared. The Sterling zone was active in the 40s and 50s, and there was a push for independence in the 60s by Nigeria, by Ghana, by India, and there was not a desire by Britain to keep the zone. Of all the arrangement, the franc zone persisted for so long. So that has always been a puzzle to me. And so I wrote a book to try to understand the persistence of the franc zone. So my first kind of conclusion on the franc zone is that it's a political economy of elites. There are 3 elites in this system. One is the France and the French Treasury, who have kind of de facto set the rules of the zone. The 50% of the reserves have been in an operations account managed by the French Treasury. It is France which decides the devaluation in 94. And so there's a French kind of political and economic interest. The second is African political elites, Francophone. For a variety of reasons, they have decided to go with this system, which is in a kind of an outdated system. And for some kind of what they perceive as stability and what they perceive as a kind of a strong anchor. But and the third is the IMF, who is the de facto supporter of the system by supporting the kind of the monetary regime and the balance of payment problem. I won't go into the technical macro aspects, but so there's three separate elites involved. Now, what is not working in the Frank zone? Why did I decide to write the book? I spent a lot of time working in Asia and Middle East. And when I look at the developmental record of the Frank zone, it's falling behind most regions in the world. What has gone wrong in the Frank zone? The only thing that has gone right is that the inflation is lower than many parts of the world. But that has come at a very severe cost. One is the GDP growth per capita is much lower than anywhere else in the world. The poverty rates are 40, 50% on average. Whether the private sector is struggling, the financial intermediation is low, the human and welfare indicators are abysmal. You don't see any of this strong developmental record that you see in countries like Malaysia, and you can go to each of the countries of the Frank zone. Even though they are different, you have the oil economies like Gabon and, Cameroon used to be, I guess, and then you have some of the others in the Sahel. They all suffer the same developmental problem. Now, what is the problem with the CFA? Why is it an opaque and system that is not modern? So I found in my analysis that there's 4 macroeconomic problems with the CFA. First, it's an anomaly of history for any developing country to peg their currency to a strong currency. So Indians refuse to peg to the pound. The Chinese have been very careful. And so what happens is when you have a strong currency, you basically subsidize imports and you penalize exports. So the Frank zone becomes an importing country par excellence. So Gabon used to produce food, now they import food. Most of West Africa is importing food. So the overvalued currency is a disincentive to the private sector. That's one. Two, there's another anomaly in the Frank zone: exchange rate flexibility. Policymakers throughout the world use exchange rates to manage shocks. When you have a shock, you let the exchange rate adjust exports and imports. You stimulate your economies with exchange rate management, and the Frank zone is rigid. As an Argentinian macroeconomist said, being pegged to the euro in the Frank zone is trying to run a marathon with a refrigerator on your back. It doesn't give policy flexibility to monetary authorities and to fiscal authorities. It's a straitjacket arrangement. That's the second problem. The third is it's an elite arrangement, an urban elite who puts money in Europe and who benefits from cheap imports of champagne or of French or European consumer goods. It doesn't stimulate the tradable sectors. It doesn't stimulate SMEs. It's a political economy of bias against agriculture. What people don't know about China, Vietnam, Indonesia is that reform began with agriculture. They're all food self-sufficient countries. And then they moved to manufacturing. The Frank zone has skipped that. Fourth is financial repression. it's a system, and I think Professor Melvin can speak better on this topic than me. And Professor Akbar, it's a system of repression. Credit to GDP is the lowest in the world in the franc zone. Because of this operations account, 50% of the money is put in France in the operations account. Not only that, there are very tight restrictions on money supply. So basically, all the money goes to defend the peg. So you have to keep a huge amount of reserves. What does that mean? You don't have money for much else. So you have this very tight limits on credit creation. So um, my bottom line in my book is it's an antiquated system defended by political elites, and unfortunately, it's supported by intellectual elites. This was the mystery to me when I researched the book. In Asia, you had a strong push of the intellectuals to be nationalists and to promote development. But the Francophone intellectual elite is not only kind of linked to France, but they also borrow their analysis from this kind of the Bretton Woods, the French Treasury perspective, which talks of macro stability. But as serious macroeconomists know, macro stability is just a word. What does it mean in reality for the people living in these regions? So I was frankly quite upset and surprised by that this system has persisted when there's no developmental of reason for it. Even countries like Russia, they decided to to float the currency. The move in the world is to float the currency. The European Central Bank is doing counter-cyclical monetary policy. You're playing with interest rates. What people don't understand about the franc zone is Togo and Gabon are not the same economic cycle of Germany. So, but the franc zone has to accept the policy of the European Central Bank. So if European Central Bank increases interest rate this year, franc zone has to do the same. So it's the problem of the peg. Now I come to my final point. So it's an anomaly, it's anti-developmental. What are the solutions? And I speak from a macroeconomic perspective. There's three kinds of solutions. The status quo is not working, and it will not be able to work by design. It cannot work. What are the three solutions? Number one is, and Professor Akbar has written very eloquently on this. One is what we call a kind of a basket peg. This is the Jeffrey Frankel Harvard macroeconomic perspective. I'm sympathetic to that view, in which he says you don't want to be, many of the CMAC countries are producing oil, so they should export. Oil should be part of the equation. When oil price goes down, the currency goes down. When oil price goes up, currency goes up. There's many advantages to that, but you give the central bankers a lot more flexibility. In monetary policy, when the currency goes down, they have no more money to invest in the economy in local currency terms. So that's the one option. The second option is you float your currency. And many countries are floating the currency. It's not it's used, but you need to have a proper framework if you float your currency, meaning you got to have certain rules. You can't just you can't replace one file with another file, and so what happens is you should have a kind of a monetary policy framework where you still target inflation, but not at 2%, at much higher level, like Ghana and South Africa do. You can develop your fiscal system. We can get into it in the Q&A. Many countries are now doing managed floats, and even Rwanda, Mauritius, and most of them are working well. So my third point is capital strike. One of the difficulties for the franc zone is if you exit the franc zone, there will be a lot of hostility because there's a lot of political interest, both outside and inside, in the persistence. Capital strike is a kind of a concept from Bowles and Gintis, two very prominent macroeconomists on the American left. And they say that the international system will penalize countries who exit from the franc zone by leading to capital outflows, by creating destabilizing currency movement. So the solution to the capital strike problem is for any kind of group who wants to exit the franc zone is to make swap lines. You make a swap line with the US Fed, you make a swap line with international, some Middle Eastern countries, and the advantage of a swap line, it gives your currency some credibility in the international market. Anyway, I've talked a lot, but my main point is that this system is not working. I think we all know that. And there's many possibilities of a new system. One has to advance the debate intellectually. We are seeing a lot of friction in the franc zone. CAR, Mali, Senegal, we're starting to see some, Burkina Faso. So this is an obsolete system that is anti-developmental. It defies the kind of consensus of modern macroeconomics about exchange rate management. And I look forward to Q&A. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Ali. I know there was a lot you could say on this. You are an authority in this field, and your book has, again, I keep talking about that because you mentioned a point about the lack of intellectual nationalism in Africa, especially in Francophone Africa, the lack of intellectual nationalism. That could be a major problem, and that really dovetails nicely with my recent findings in trying to understand how we can make economics trump over politics in the CFA zone, and basically come to the same conclusion that you make, that it is the elite that have been winning all the time. The Francophone elites, whom we call the Franc-Afrique, both domestic in those countries and international organizations, and the French business class that makes the profit from selling their products to these countries. So the elites have the ones who are the main winners in this system, whereas the masses have been losing all the time. The poor are the losers, and the urban entrepreneurs are paying the price. So again, I shared with you my thoughts about that, how there are just two ways: either the masses form a coalition, the poor, all those who are losing, have an interest in forming a coalition to overthrow the elite in these countries. How they do that, whether by revolution or by democratic elections, that's up to them to choose which path they want to do. But your point on nationalism is so important, and you're speaking to Southern Cameroonians who are also in the quest for political independence, but they struggle a lot. Nationalism, they don't take these things as concerning them. Everyone behaves a kind of game theoric way, that is somebody else who should do this. Okay, I should live, be alive, and to enjoy the freedoms, but somebody else's blood should be wasted or spilled. You know, so how does you are coming from a different continent? What is it in Indians and people in Asia that makes them more nationalistic? Put the overall goal, and my little study of history showed how the British, the Indian independence, actually, how the British were basically cutting their heads off. They were all, people were lining up, and after the first person goes, their head is chopped off, the next person follows. They didn't fall back and run away. The British kept chopping off the heads until they realized that no, they can't do this anymore. So what is it in the Indians, in the Asians, that is not in Africa? Can you help us? These are challenging issues. These are questions that keep us awake the whole night.
Thank you. It's always been a puzzle to me. When I came out with the book, some of my biggest enemies were Francophone African intellectuals. And they were saying, no, what does this guy know about this part of the world? We have stability. And I said, you have so much poverty, you have so much lack of development. And I think there was a kind of, I don't know if I want to call it a Frantz Fanon feature, but there's this kind of mindset that the foreigners know better than us, and we should follow the foreigners. You bring up very interesting point. Let me tell you a few just a quick anecdotes, right? When India became independent, Nehru was a very much of an ardent nationalist, and he was a socialist, and he did a lot of schooling in England. But there was a rupture in his views. I think in Francophone Africa, if you look at Senghor or Houphouet, or there was always this desire to be part of France. So I think there's a cultural thing at play here, one. Two is the Asians were obsessed with development. You look at Park in Korea, you look at Suharto in Indonesia, he wanted food security. You look at Lee Kuan Yew. When Lee Kuan Yew became head of Singapore, he hired an economist called Wistemius. And Wistemius said, let's build your domestic industrial capacity. Let's build your manufacturing. Let's integrate. And so I think that there was a lot of kind of developmental vision. I think the Francophone Africa has it the least. I think in East Africa, I see more of it. But I want to come to a final point, right? Which is that there's also been an element of coercion in the Frank zone. The history of the Frank zone has the independent people like Silvanos Olympio and has Sankara, but somehow the political and military elites removed them. So you had this kind of asymmetry of power in which the intellectuals sided with the military and the political elite. In Asia, the intellectuals do not side with the military and the political elites. So that's one difference. And the military and the political elites in Asia have been a bit like Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a rich patrician, but Roosevelt said, I want to leave no one behind. So there was a kind of a development vision. You guys know better Africa than me, but this is based on my 15, 20 years, it's been a puzzle to me. Why there isn't greater nationalism, why people don't want to change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. And there was a comment, not really a question to you. I think kind of agreeing with you by Tony Bolton. He says, intellectual nationalism is an issue to be taken seriously in the review of our curricula from primary to tertiary. Independence must be made organic by re-engineering the conception of who we are, where we are, and where we should be going in a sustainable manner. Chief Al-Wolowo taught this through for Nigeria in the 1960s in his book, The Strategy of the Peoples of the Republic of Nigeria. Thank you so much for that comment. And again, we're not going to hold Ali here for too long because we have other panelists that are coming up. But again, I cannot emphasize enough, we have to get, first of all, intellectual independence and freedom. The intellectuals need to start taking the lead. Philosopher kings, intellectuals should lead. They should not shy behind and sit behind and enjoy their paychecks and look at society go away. The intellectuals of Southern Cameroonians and Africans, the ball is on your court. You will, in the next generation, if there is any, you will answer for why you sat quiet and misery and oppression and injustice and said nothing. You know, so that book by Dr. Ali is on Amazon. Please recommend it. Read it. Get a copy for yourself. Let's emancipate ourselves. Let's not be Africans who they said, if you want to hide something from them, write it in the book. No, not me. I hope you all say today, not me. If you hide anything in the book, I'll read it.
Find it.
So let's get that. Thank you, Ali, for your time with us. I'm going to bring our next moderator, my co-moderator, JC, to introduce the next speaker, who is
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Agbo. I think that was awesome presentation there from Professor Ayugo and Professor Ali. Um, I enjoyed them thoroughly. I know we can have these conversations for the next, I don't know, 1 month and just keep going. But talking about intellectuals that do not shy away, intellectuals from Africa, French Africa that do not shy away, I'm going to be introducing our next speaker, our next distinguished panelist, and this is none other than Professor Idrissa Odrago. I am so hoping that I'm pronouncing that correctly. Professor Idrissa is a development economist and economics professor at the Université Urbaine Nouvelle, at the Thomas Sankara University in Burkina Faso. He is a consultant to several international organizations, notably the UN. His expertise spans across governance, human development, inequality, and regional integration in Africa. And I think this is just perfect because CEFA has a lot to do with regional integration in Africa. So we will be listening to Professor Idrissa right now.
Professor Idrissa had to do his
yes, he could not make it, so
recorded so that we don't suffer any technological hit.
Good morning to all. First of all, let me thank the organizer of this conference to have me here to talk about a topic that, although being controversial these last years, is very essential for the well-being of African people. Before discussing scenarios for exiting the CFA franc, it seems important to me to present the mechanism put in place in the framework of monetary cooperation within the zone franc, and in order to better understand the issue at stake. After that, I will give some insight on the intellectual rationale behind the ongoing populist demand to disband the CFA franc currency board and the constraint facing those African countries seeking to exit the franc zone. I will then talk about some viable options for African countries seeking to exit the CFA franc zone, and we end with some recommendation. Thus, the CFA franc was born in December 26, 1945, the day France ratified the Bretton Woods Agreement and made its first declaration of parity to the International Monetary Fund. Today, the franc zone is presented as an example of cooperation based essentially on 4 fundamental rules. First, free convertibility between the currency at the zone at a fixed parity. Second, unlimited convertibility of the various currencies in the zone. Free movement of capital within the zone and standardization of the regulation of financial relations with the others. The pooling of external assets. The central bank of the franc zone must deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserve with the French Treasury in an account known as the operation account. As advantage of this device, the defender of the franc zone find that the CFA franc has a strong guarantee of convertibility. The member countries of the franc zone will be assured of stability of their currency. These arguments do not convince many analysts and activists on the African country. African people, and especially the youth, reject the CFA francs mainly because the CFA francs is the materialization of the monetary dependency of the member countries of the franc zone and the manifestation of neocolonialism on the part of France. The obligation to deposit 50% of the reserve in the French treasury is, among other things, an indicators of this form of colonialism. It is believed that this deposit deprives the African countries of the franc zone of liquidity and causes them to lose part of their sovereignty capacity. Another problem is that the governors of the two central banks do not have the freedom to vary the exchange rate of their currency, as the parity with the euro forces them to follow the policy of the European Central Bank. Finally, it's argued that the peg to the euro means that the CFA franc is subject to fluctuation of the European currency, with consequences that are sometimes harmful to the export of countries in the zone, at least when the euro is strong. The CFA franc is too strong currency for the economy of the franc zone, and its operation is too rigid and not conducive to financing development. Indeed, the fixed exchange rate means that the value of the franc CFA is determined by the economic situation within the Eurozone and not by the economic situation within the franc zone. Moreover, excessive monetary rigor to preserve the parity of the franc lead countries to neglect certain indicators, such as unemployment, than if they were in a floating regime. The franc zone countries have very high production costs for most of the goods they consume, and the strength of their currency relative to their economy makes imports such cheaper than local production. As a result, they are forced to rely on imports to the detriment of strengthening their local production capacity. As a result, the CFA franc zone has consumption economies and not production economies. These countries therefore need a currency that leads them to produce what they consume. This will balance their trade balance to some extent. Moreover, the CFA franc does not allow for good financing for the zone's economies. While in the Eurozone, the ratio of credit to GDP is 100%, it is only 23% in the franc zone. Countries do not have such margin to finance the socio-economic infrastructure that is essential to the development of their economies. Central banks therefore do not provide sufficient support for the financing of economic activity. Also, free transferability leads to the flight of capital that is indispensable for reinvesting in this economy. This situation for the African countries seeking to exit the CFA franc zone. As regards to viable option for African countries to exit the CFA franc zone, 4 possibilities are generally proposed: revision of the agreement, sovereign currency, African or regional common currency, binary currency. The revision of the monetary agreement aims to modify certain aspects of the operation of the franc zone, namely the reduction of reserve requirement to deposit with the franc treasury, and the relax of the peg to the euro in order to adopt a floating exchange. In fact, these changes aims at finding answers to to the controversial point or the political irritant that have been the subject of much criticism from African people opinion. The fact is that technically the proposed change will not provide any major advantage to the CFA franc. As for the first point, the reduction of the reserve requirement, one should keep in mind that the reserve are those that guarantee and determine the quantity of bill and coin that circulate in the CFA zone. Reducing reserve automatically means reducing the monetary base. This in turn will lead to the reduction of money supply and thus the liquidity of the economy. From a technical point of view, there is no advantage to reducing the shock of reserve held by the French Treasury. The second point, relaxing the peg to the euro in order to adopt a floating exchange would remove all interest from the CFA francs. Indeed, what would be the point of the currency stored by France if the value of the currency they are supposed to guarantee can be fluctuated independently of this stock? The solution of a sovereign currency consists of the countries of the franc zone in adopting their own currency. There is no particular legal obstacle to a country denouncing the monetary agreement and taking the initiative to create its own money currency. Having sovereign currency requires that the currency has two qualities: stability and flexibility. Stability is necessary for this instrumental mission of money, which are a standard of measurement. A standard does not change overnight. An instrument of exchange which must be reliable, and an instrument of saving, the value of saving should not be subject to deterioration. Flexibility in relation to foreign currency meaning the possibility of changing the exchange rate of currency is necessary whenever the country imports more than it sells. Most of the countries of the CFA zone are in this posture. The third option is the common sovereign currency. Is the establishment of the sovereign currency on a regional scale or an African scale. The common currency that has the advantage of being applied on a larger scale than that of a single country. This could provide significant margin of internal adjustment to balance the external deficit and maintain the value of the currency. The third one is a binary currency. Is a solution that allows a major fully convertible currency such as the CFA to coexist with the same production system with a minor currency whose purchasing power is reduced to local production. Let's give some recommendation now. The first one is I would like to say that it's important to adopt a common regional currency. This means maintaining the advantage of the single currency, the actual CFA franc, which would be based on a solid foundation and work outside the exclusive guarantee of the euro in order to guarantee a real autonomy of the currency. The principle of pooling foreign exchange reserve must be maintained while avoiding depositing these reserves in the French Treasury. They should be deposited in the central bank of the zone. To do this, it will be necessary first of all to change the name of the currency and to remove France from the management bodies of the currency. The zone must have its own African currency that bears in the identity of the zone that use it. It will then be necessary to have a currency whose value corresponds to the economy of the zone. To do so, it is imperative to change the exchange rate regime and set up a floating regime pegged to a basket of currency with which the country have an important trade. It will also be necessary to redefine monetary policy. In particular, the rate applied to foreign exchange reserve could be gradually reduced, taking into account the need of the zone economy, and this must be done by the African countries themselves. Finally, the convertibility of the new currency between YMU and CIMAC, the two zones, must be ensured. This will promote inter-regional trade and soft cooperation. In addition, free transferability within the zone must be regulated. In this context, capital flight by multinational outside the zone must be limited, and Africa could have more resources at its disposal to finance development. Thank you all for listening to me.
We do know, we do know that Professor Idrissa is not with us, but that presentation was just awesome and such an important and I think the best follow-up from what Professor Ali just presented. If you listen to them keenly, you would see that they identified similar problems with the SAFER and they identified similar solutions to the issue of the SAFER in the CIMAC zone. So, Professor Agbo, I know you, are you standing in for Prof.
Yes.
Idrissa so I can
So,
grill you a little bit?
Yeah, so for the interest of time, I think,
Yes.
and I was looking at the questions that are coming in the chat room. Actually, some of them were dropped. It seems like Professor Idrissa answered them. I don't
Yes.
see any, there was a question for Ali, but if you don't mind, we really value your comments. We will need to go into the next panel, but Ali is turned on his camera. So Ali wanted to respond to a question in the chat room that was directed at him, and then we enter into our Ambazonian expert panel.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Ali?
Yeah, just to clarify one point, right? What I said was that the only advantage was that the inflation rate is lower, not the interest rate. So when the point that is very important to make is that monetary and fiscal authorities have no power in the franc zone. They cannot change the interest rate. They cannot expand money supply to adjust to the shocks. Climate shock is leading to higher inflation. You know, they cannot expand fiscal policy. They cannot expand credit. So imagine being in a straitjacket and the world is shaking around you. That's the fundamental problem with the franc zone. And we can talk about, I'm totally here if you want to get into more details on the basket peg and everything. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a question also for you, Ali, about what is the time dimension. We promise our audience that we will relay their questions. And so there's this question about what could be an estimated timeline to change from one currency to another. For example, to change from CFA to an AMBA currency.
I think the timeline will be a couple of years. You need to make 3 decisions. One is, what is going to be the currency? Is it going to be pegged to a basket? Is it going to be free floating? That's the first question. 2 is, the central bank has to be ready. What is the kind of monetary policy regime? Are you going to target inflation? How much money supply are you going to release? You don't want to be Democratic Republic of Congo that issued a currency and then it was not credible, and so the economy is still dollarized. And the third is swap line. You need external credibility, right? because imagine Swiss chocolates. When they first came out, no one knew what they were. Now everyone thinks of Switzerland as chocolate. So you need to build a brand. The
Yes.
brand can be built marketing, and anyway, so I'm optimistic about many possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Again, the views expressed by Ali and all our panelists today are solely theirs, and they do not reflect the views of the organizations for which they work with or have worked with. And their presence at this webinar is not an endorsement of Southern Cameroon Independence Quest. Thank you.
And so, Prof, before we jump to the next session, bringing our Ambazonian expert panelists on board, I think that I just want to thank our international speakers, panelists for today. I know some of them had to jump off because they had other commitments, but before we get to our experts in the house, so let me quickly just sum up what we have heard so far from the different speakers that have spoken for about a minute or so, and then we can this is just to remind those that might have joined us late. So in case you made part of the presentation, we have had about 5 esteemed panelists speak to us today. And it started by Dr. Ako Asana, the chairman of the board, addressing all of us, welcoming us, and speaking to the value of this virtual conference. He was very clear to say that we are not one-dimensional, and we need to start looking at the things that make a country a great country. And one of them includes economic independence, which also speaks to currency and other economic issues that we should be aspiring and discussing. So thank you, Dr. Ako, for that. Then we had Honorable Tibonagi, who was with us, again, applauding this initiative and the fact that we keep looking forward. His emphasis, however, was that we should keep working on uniting better, on looking for common goals and speaking with one voice on the things that matter to Ambazonians and to homeland. And we then had Professor Ayogo Melvin, who spoke to us very extensively on the question. And I think that the key notes to take from what everything that he said to us, which was very basic, very easy to understand, was the fact that yes, while there is a concern as to whether we should be having this conversation right now, given that we still have other aspects of the revolution that are our main focus, the answer was yes, that might be a concern, but at the same time, it is still possible to do things concurrently. They are not mutually exclusive, and these have happened before, and there is a possibility it is not impossible for the people of Ambazonia to start having conversations and actually end up having a currency of their own. So that was the one key takeaway from Professor Ayogo there. And Professor Ali, who if for any reason just explained all the reasons why we should not be part of the CFA bucket, Professor Ali pointed all those reasons out. He gave the reasons why that currency is terrible for any forward-thinking economy, any evolving economy, any modern economy. Ambazonians are not looking to operate in the 30s or in the 40s. We're looking to operate as a modern economy. And so we need to start looking at aspects that are going to drive us and make us that country that we want to be. And his thoughts were actually echoed again by Professor Idrissa in his address to us this afternoon, highlighting the issues with the CFA, how they are not in any way. This is a plan put together by the colonies to benefit them. This is not about Africa. This is not about Africans in any way. So whatever policies these are, they are not meant to benefit developing economies. Reasons why French countries are the least developed, have an extremely high poverty level, and have an unreliable currency in the terms that you cannot really match their currency day to day in the market, float them and see exactly where they stand. And whatever policies that come with that, they are detrimental. If anything, they are advantageous to the colonial master than to Africans themselves. We do know that as Ambazonians, we have no affiliation to francs. We are no colony of francs. We have no contract with francs as far as their currency is concerned. And so there is absolutely no reason why we can keep subjecting ourselves to this currency if there is a possibility that we can, again, economically become independent of France and La République du Cameroon. So those are some of the things that we have had this afternoon. There is a lot more, and we're going to be making these recordings available over time. But this is what we have heard from our international panelists. And we do know that a lot of people want to hear more. We're going to try to make that happen. But for now, I would hand over to Professor Akbar so that we can get on with our next set of panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Fantastic synthesis. And welcome once more to this virtual international conference on currency developments in West and Central Africa. CFA exit scenarios of an amber currency. This is happening very well, and we are entering the last and probably the most important, I would dare to say, part of this conversation, because we're going to hit now scenarios of an amber currency. And we have Ambazonians themselves to talk about it, nobody to write their history for them. So ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinguished honor to welcome to this Ambazonian expert panel to talk on the scenarios of an amber currency based on what you've already heard so far from our international speakers. Among the topics I would explore with our esteemed panelists, about 4 topics, and there are only 2 of them, so we will have enough time to explore the 4 topics. The first one is, what are the intellectual rationale? What is the intellectual rationale for a country to have its own currency? Can a newly formed state develop successfully without having its own currency? That's one. What are the main challenges that the soon-to-be state of Ambazonia, what are the main challenges it will face in developing its own currency? And how do we overcome that? Of course, not all the answers will be given in the public here, but they will tell you something about it. Then we'll also talk about the lessons that Ambazonia could learn from countries that have exited from colonial currency arrangements, because what is happening to Ambazonia is not new. There's nothing new under the sun. It has happened to some other people. Who are they and what can we learn? What are the recommendations for best case and second best options for exchange regime for the state of Ambazonia? And of course, we will take also questions from the audience. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce the people who would lead us in these conversations along with me here present. So the first of our distinguished speakers today is Professor Aloysius Amin Ejab. Professor Amin has published extensively on the CFA franc zone and the Cameroonian economy. He recently co-edited the book Monetary and Financial Systems in Africa, Integration and Economic Performance, published by Palgrave in 2022. His most recent article, titled The Development Cost of Maintaining Price and Economic Stability in Central and West Africa CFA franc zone, was published in the authoritative Oxford Handbook on Cameroon's Economy, edited by Celestin Monga. While his other article, The CFA franc, Financial Sector and Economic Growth in the CIMAC, is currently being published in a book that he is editing, Africa's Monetary Regimes and Institutions. So, and Professor Amin is currently a professor of economics at Clayton State University right here in the US, and a senior fellow at the Institute for Development Solutions, IDS. You're welcome, Professor Amin. Welcome. You just want to say hi to people. You're not saying anything more than that yet while I introduce your next speaker.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. All right. Thank you. He's an icon. If you don't know, I read many of his books, still struggling to find my way in economics. So the second distinguished panelist today is Professor Herman Dofo. Professor Herman is a faculty at the Indiana University Cayley School of Business. Professor Dofo's research focuses on competitive dynamics, resource management, and top management teams. Professor Dofo is currently the senior associate editor of the Africa Journal of Management and the incoming associate editor for the Journal of Management. So Professor Ndofo, welcome. Nice to have you. All right, and we will have our discussant who would give us comments on the contributions. I have to do justice to everyone. I will bring forward Dr. Ambe to give us comments on the contributions that we hear right now. On that note, again, I must start off with a disclaimer. The views and opinions shared by our panelists today are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect the views of the academic institutions that they represent, neither do they reflect the views of the board of the Bank of Ambazonia. I want that to be on record. All right, ladies and gentlemen, yes, your turn. Professor Amin, you're going to go first on this. Our audience wants to know from you whether a newly formed state like Ambazonia can successfully develop and become industrialized like Singapore, Malaysia, without having its own independent currency. You have 4 minutes, sir. Your volume is low, please.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yes,
very
we
much.
can hear you.
It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I don't think that time is too short for me, but I'll try to see what I can do.
Sorry, don't be under any constraint, please.
Is Marvin still there? Marvin still there? That's my very good friend.
Marvin left. He was committed to something. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Now, you started by 2 questions. One is that what is the intellectual rationale for its own currency? Second, can newly formed states develop without its own monetary and exchange regime? The second question is no. And as our time goes on, I will be able to give you reason why I said no. The country cannot develop without having its own independent monetary and rate regime, as you have seen, as we have already seen, been expressed in the development of CFA franc zone. I start with giving a small narrative. When we were in Senegal, I had the opportunity of talking with President Abdoulaye Wade. We were having a discussion with him, and he said it was a private discussion. We said he does not see any reason why Africans, particularly Francophone Africans, have their money in French treasury and still they are trying to borrow and they cannot develop. Then I told him that, Mr. President, you are the president and you have the power to do anything that you want to do. His answer to me was that there are many agreements that France signed with the Francophone Africans, which include cultural, economic, military, social, political accords, as well as administrative and legal legacies that reinforce monetary union arrangement with them. So you have to first also among those before you can appeal them. This is actually why you see there's a problem of Africa, Francophone Africa, shifting completely away from the French monetary regime arrangement. The central bank is not a market-based established. It's not a market-based. It is established and protected by legislation with legal monopoly status of promoting banknotes, cash, other means of payments and transaction. A central bank is fundamental of the financial system and government functions. As it formulates countries' monetary policy, it regulates member banks are responsible for flow of money and credits through its economy. Hence, the central bank manages the financial, monetary, and macro aggregates of the country. In other words, if that is the function of the central bank, a central bank must be, a country must develop with a central bank of its own. Traditionally, the central bank's rationale has been monetary policy. However, the central bank also developed the financial system and promote economic development. These roles are in addition to the potential regulatory and monetary rules. The objective of central bank here, the central bank has two main broad objectives. First, monetary stabilization. Second, developmental objectives. These two objectives are in the statutes of many African central banks, but the two African CFA franc zone central banks do not have the developmental objectives at all. Even the monetary stabilization objectives is very, very much limited. Does the central bank makes profit? Yes, despite the fact that it's not market-based, it makes profit. Central bank earns interest on advances provided in government and on holdings of treasury bills, registered stocks, foreign currency securities and deposits, interest earnings, commission on foreign exchange transaction. These earnings of the central bank are moved to the central government treasury as dividends. This is what exactly happens with the central banks of CFA franc zone countries, where the reserves are lodged not in the European Central Bank or French Central Bank, but in the French Treasury. So the interest just go, the earnings just go to the French Treasury, not to the Central Bank. Now, comparing the European Union with the CFA franc zone countries, one can observe a key or apparently key similarity of the regional integration between that of progressively deepening and widening of their respective integration more as within the European Union. However, there are great differences in substance and intent. An important distinction is the process of integration and union. European members countries have been fully involved in promoting the European agenda and their respective interests, and making sure the European objectives go together with their own country's interests. This is not the case in the CFA franc zone. This is important because if we are talking about development of a country, we have to see what the bank stands for, because there are two main principles, tools that a government uses to develop its economy. That is the monetary policies and the financial and the fiscal policy. In this case, the Francophone countries are limited in those two policies. The franc started as economic, and what I'm trying to show here is this: the CFA franc has been used as a means of sucking raw materials from the French countries. Since 1901, the CFA franc countries have been producing and exporting nearly the same type of raw materials. You go now and see, look at what their major exports are, it's still the same raw materials. The structure of the economy is very, very much on that. The structure of the economy remains raw material producers, and no way would you expect the countries to actually develop when they remain private producers. Another aspect is that the system is built in such a way that these countries cannot develop the private sector, and neither can they develop their financial system. You know, we have embryonic or initial capital markets. One is in Yaoundé, the Yaoundé the stock exchange, which is still at its initial stage. The other one is in Libreville, which is supposed to be actually a capital market. Then with the one in West Africa, they have a regional one based in the capital of Senegal. The capital head office is in Senegal, with the regional branches in the other 8 countries. But see, these have not actually been developed in such a way that they can generate resources for capital development. This, if you look at the banking sector, right from the word go, you look at it in 1885, when the French actually tried to establish a financial system by creating the Bank of Senegal in Dakar, and then move it and then extend it to Bank of Central Africa in Yaoundé. They make sure that they eliminate the banking, the commercial sector of money that was actually floating around these countries, and impose this CFA franc. As Dr. Zafar mentioned about the CFA franc was actually formed or started in 1945 when French, after the Second World War, the French economy was badly battered. So they created the CFA franc there. And what they did is they moved part of the money into the CFA franc account. And the part that used to make sure that they come into the same parity with the dollar, which was now the dominant currency. They did that, but in that case, the CFA franc was now overvalued relative to the French franc. They did that in case to actually show that they can actually try to use that to import raw material from the French-speaking Africa at little or no cost. Meanwhile, they were exporting raw manufactured goods to the French-speaking Africa. And these raw materials, these manufactured goods were mostly consumed by the French who were in these countries. And like Zala talked about the elites. The elites actually collaborate in this endeavor. Now, I don't want to go through the history of how.
Thank you, Professor. I mean, I think you have more than answered my question and maybe even touched on other topics.
Let me talk about this mission.
So let me, Professor, let me quickly bring in Professor Herman, then we'll come back to you in the meantime. Let me bring Professor Herman here. Herman, the first question was, you've heard the views expressed already by Professor Amin on this question, whether a newly formed state like Ambazonia can successfully develop without and industrialize without having its own independent currency. Professor Amin said emphatically no. And he was on the path of actually going deeper and deeper into what happened, what went wrong with the CFA arrangement, if at all it even started right. We are assuming it started right, and all what that went wrong with it. But I believe that this panel, this particular conversation is focused on Ambazonia. So maybe, Herman, if you don't have much, if you prefer to go to the second question, I will be fine with that. What are the main challenges that the soon-to-be Ambazonian state faces in developing its own independent currency?
Yes. Thank you very much, Prof. I think I will combine both because they have some similar themes that go together. Clearly, you cannot be independent if you don't control your monetary system. And in thinking about that, something that I think it is very important that we draw a distinction between what's matter. The CFA is not a currency. I think it's a misconception we keep saying. The franc CFA is a legal tender. It is not a currency. And if I have time later, I can go into the details of the difference. Ambazonia cannot develop if it just gets another legal tender. A legal tender is just any money or note that you can exchange for goods, not different from trading by barter. You lose all the instruments of a monetary system. Now, what do you as Ambazonia, what do we need to do, things we can discuss publicly to be able to successfully set up our own system, right? The first that goes underneath any monetary system is trust. We have to build trust, internal trust, external trust. Because at the end of the day, people are going to walk around with pieces of paper based on the trust that that paper will be exchanged for something of value. And this goes back to the question Mangang was asking online regarding inflation. Inflation is one of the greatest destroyers of value, right? I have to be sure that 1,000 amber or 1,000 cowries or whatever the denomination, or $1,000 I received today buys me approximately the same thing a month from now or a year from now. Otherwise, I cannot negotiate my pay because it may not be able to pay my rent or feed my family 2 months from now if inflation is 50%, right? Now, how do we build that trust internally? Property rights regime is what underlies any fundamental economic system. Do we as institutions, whatever level the institution is, from Bank of Ambazonia to our other subservient pseudo-governance bodies, are we building the trust of the people? If we don't build the trust of the people, if we don't capture the trust of the people, it doesn't matter what we call it, it doesn't matter what we do, it will not work. Somebody mentioned about South Sudan. Actually, and correcting the earlier speaker, South Sudan did have its own independent currency at independence. They never built the trust in the currency, so the currency failed. So this is a second iteration. The new currency they're introducing is a second iteration of a post-independent currency, right? Now, the second level of trust is in external parties. Because yes, the currency is good for you to trade within your nation, but when you now start thinking about foreign exchange, and if we have time later, we'll talk about the nuances of monetary policy, especially when you think about independence and the need to control your foreign reserves and foreign exchange. You need international parties, other nations, citizens of other countries to also be able to trust that currency. That will not happen overnight. There's no question about that. And there are lots of steps that need to be taken pre-independence and post-independence to establish that, right? And some of them or most of them we cannot go about discussing here. So the answer is yes, it can be done. We definitely have the capabilities to do it. And it is not too soon for us to start working on the most fundamental ingredient for that, which is building trust in the people, having trust in Southern Cameroonians' ability to build institutions that respect fundamental rights, especially when it comes to economics, property rights.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope that was
within
the time limit.
For being very articulate and very direct. And I hope our discussant is making notes of all those important comments that you made. Now, I want to be upfront with all of us. We've been going for 2 hours now, and the attention span of most people on virtual platforms is very limited. So we know our experts here have a lot to share. Professor Amin has a lot in his notes. Heyman came fully prepared, but guess what? We don't have all the time to be able to let you expound on all the ambitious project that we had today. But let's say this, let's consider this as a starting point of these conversations that will continue, and hopefully maybe not even in a public space like this, being streamed out on social media networks, maybe somebody and the lead and the Ambazonian leaders here present may probably see an opportunity to organize conclaves where experts meet in person and to talk deeper and work strategically to come out with these issues without sharing them all on social media. The point that Attorney Button continues to emphasize, whether it is any value in sharing all these conversations in the public at this time. So I want to leave the audience, our panelists, with one question, or maybe let them choose what they want to address from their notes. They came prepared with a lot of things to share, but I'll give them, each one of them, 5 minutes to probably just pick out the important or silent things that you think merits to be heard today. Especially as from going from the first part of the conversation, we are seeing that if if so far the government of Cameroon has maintained his idea of a one Cameroon agenda, one Cameroon, and when you talk about the Southern Cameroon crisis, they say, oh no, it's a one Cameroon. It's only something we have to discuss in a large dialogue or internal dialogue. They think it's a one Cameroon thing. And so despite our historical grievances and marginalization, they don't think it is enough reason to question that one Cameroon agenda. But what we've heard from this conference is that the failures of the CFA franc zone system, which is on the neck of Ambazonians right now, is also a more compelling reason why Ambazonians should fight with all their life to get independence, just because of the economic strangulation and slavery that system is imposing on Francophone Africa. That should be enough reason for anybody to agree with Ambazonians that you need to go. You need to be free. So what do you have on your notes, Professor Amin? I'll go to you first, that you think would align with the kind of lesson that we are hearing, and correct me if that's not the trend in what we've been hearing for 2 hours. If that's not what you think is coming out, feel free to correct me. Then sum up your arguments with us in 5 minutes before we bring out the questions in the chat room. And of course, the Ambazonian leaders who are present are also keen to make some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Agua. I think one thing I would just say is let's just discuss questions in establishing a central bank. Establishing a central bank is a challenging process because of the importance of that institution. So the first question you ask, there are many questions you can ask, but the first one you ask is, what are the appointments? What are the appointments and voting rules with the procedures of governing board in monetary policy and other related issues? How do you appoint the members of the board? Second, how do you ensure trust and interest of the people and people's interests manifested or should be reflected in the central bank policy? Third, the question of the independence of the central bank, independence from political pressure and institution. The central bank should supposed to be independent from political pressure. Like you see most of developed countries' central banks, like in the US system, is the central bank or Fed is completely independent from any political pressure. The chairperson and his board take decisions irrespective of what the pressure I get from the political institutions. Fourth, the mandate of central bank and the primary objectives of the monetary policy. The objectives include fundamental ones like sustaining an efficient and stable financial system with payment system. The price level stabilization with general economic activity, such as embedded in the situation of reducing poverty. But you see, we have noticed that in case of the CFA franc, the poverty level is very, very high relative to all other countries. But the central bank can actually do something about that in such a way that you reduce poverty. Remember, you look at the study that has been done in the Central Bank of India, actually impose some regulations that the banking sector, they must have branches in the remote and impoverished area. And they did that. Building the initial items in the central bank balance sheet. When we talk about independence, the assets with capital and liability, they must ensure capitalization of this of the central bank. The bank must have enough capital to sustain, to stand any problems. 6, developing an analytical framework for policy and decision making. You have 2 levels of analysis: the levels of monetary aggregates and level of macro aggregates, which could also be both internal and external. 7, how does the central bank keep up with the technological advance? We are talking about digital. How do you keep it up? You try to keep it in such a way that at least you have to, because of digitalization and automation, integrate several resilience with decision-making process and into the system. Then the last point I would make here is, where do you print your money on your coins? Where do you print it? I know the most country, about 3/4 of African countries print their money outside. CFA France print in France, but they print and send the money to the 2 regional banks to distribute. They're just like distributing.
Almost like a good.
Yes, they are not actually. But other countries actually sit down, negotiate, and place an order for their currency to be produced or printed or mint and send it back to them. So I leave it that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. I mean, clearly you've outlined an agenda for another conference. Actually, all the points you've mentioned there are enough to host a 3-day conference. You know, and thank you for your understanding. Professor Herman, what did you pick? And there are questions also in the chat room. We start answering them before we would bring in our esteemed Ambazonian leaders for comments, but we need to answer the questions in the chat room. Herman, you first have your 3 to 5 minutes of what you came prepared with to share, and then we connect with the questions that are in the chat room. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Agbo. I think I will do that, but I would also take it with the stance of tackling some of the questions, because I think it dovetails nicely. I will give a little bit my perspective, and to kind of position my perspective, I'll give a bit my background, right? I think many people may or may not know. Yes, professionally, I'm in the business school. I do business strategy. But my education is in economics and international relations. So I look at things from mostly a behavioral point of view, although still with a broader economic paradigm. So when we look at this conference and at this webinar, and when we look at the issues facing Southern Cameroon and Ambazonia, fundamentally, it is an economic issue. We will not be colonized by La République, and France will not be holding us hostage if we do not have valuable resources. If Southern Cameroon was just a deserted desert, we would have been free 100 years ago or more. So the issue of the currency is intricately interwoven with our freedom, because the currency is currently the method through which France holds or maintains its colonialization of the colonies. Now, I know there is the mantra that the enemy of my enemy can be my friend. It doesn't always work, but if you play and position your cards right, it can work for you in the broader momentum. To be independent, to have an independent currency, you are going to need a lot of friends to build that external recognition. But to get there, you're also going to need a lot of friends to push the colonizers to help let you go. And you need to align the motivations. So addressing one of our leaders there, I think Barrister Bobga Harmony, as to the wisdom of having some of these discussions public. I really want to congratulate Bank of Ambazonia for setting this theme, tying the thought of our currency to CFR exit, because that is one of those brilliant moves we have to do, and we have to do actually publicly. Because, permit me to just take a minute to tell you how this ties together with several things. Now we have a movement within the Sahel growing, centered around CFR exit. And they become our very good friends. We have our colleague from Burkina Faso who spoke earlier. Many people know that we have many good friends and sympathizers. They're tied to the economic issue. Here within the US, I spent several days last week doing a white paper and briefings for some people, talking to the Congressional Black Caucus. Nothing should be secret about this. In fact, we should go about shouting this at the top of our lungs. In the US, in 3 weeks is going to be tax day. And most of us, as we're doing our taxes, we're wondering where our money is going. At the same time, I am looking at the news, and in France, they are protesting that the retirement age is being taken from 62 to 64. Most of us in the US are never going to retire, partly because of the taxes, by the way. And we don't see the connection. And let us take a minute when we explain to our American friends that you work, you know, we have the tax liberation day, which goes to April 1st, the number of days you work just to pay your taxes. How does this colonialization keep going on? African countries, Franc CFA countries are the poorest. They are always broke, but this regime can go on because remember, the CFA was created the same day the Bretton Woods institutions were created, same day. France can hold the reserves of this country. By the way, something nobody talks about is those reserves, nobody knows the accounting of those reserves. So the actual amount of those reserves kind of is still fuzzy math. The economies of these countries may constantly get drained, but these countries are zombies. They don't die. Why don't they die? Just like we saw with Cameroon last week, every year they go to the IMF and the World Bank, and the IMF and the World Bank gives them something to keep them alive. Who puts money into the IMF and the World Bank? The US, for example, contributes 20% of IMF and World Bank capital. That is how those in the US, for example, my tax dollars go to ensure that while the Frenchman gets 2 months of vacation a year, I am negotiating with my wife which 2 weeks of vacation, how we coordinate our 2 weeks of vacation. While I may have to work till I'm 80, the Frenchman is protesting on the street that they are taking retirement age from 62 to 64. This is how these are all tied together. We have to explain this. The Franc CFA is the method through which France fleeces the African countries, and we in the US, Germany is the second highest contributor. Japan is contributing to the Bretton Woods institution. We prop up these zombie nations in Central Africa, in West Africa, such that they could subsidize the French welfare state. Until we start cutting that umbilical cord, and that umbilical cord can only be cut, can mostly be cut also from pressure outside. We start in the West. We constantly draw this connection between the CFA, the immigration problem in the Mediterranean, the immigration problem in the border. Why do we have mostly Africans now in Mexico trying to cross the border, not South Americans? It has everything to do with France. If we cannot draw that connection to the colonial currency, once we draw that connection, and we have to do so publicly, once we draw that connection, then all the machinations of the US government, the German government, the Italian government that don't want the immigrants coming to their shores become our friends.
Yes.
And that is how we use the economic policy to get our political freedom. Thank you. I hope that also answers the question.
Thank you, Professor Herman. Actually, you touched a point. We had an Italian prime minister who within the European Union actually point France's neo-colonial policies in Africa. He blamed them for the massive immigration issues that his country, Italy, and other European countries are facing. So, right, is the currency, the CFA is that thing that we can henceforth use, even at the same time as we have a historical arguments and legal arguments, we can also play on the currency as one of the reasons why we need to shake the shackles off. At this time, I want to bring, thank you so much, our esteemed panelists. Time is not on our side, as you all know. I want to bring up Dr. Ambe to give us kind of a short synthesis. Dr. Ambe, if you want to do that in under 3 minutes, if you can, so that we can let the Ambazonian leaders who are here to also make their comments. And we want to really thank them for their patience. We didn't anticipate that this was going to go this long. And I can see that Ali needs to leave. Yes, thank you so much, Ali, and keep safe out there. Over to you, Dr. Ambe.
Yes, thank you very much. And with all protocols respected, this really a very grand event. And, all the ideas that have come in are really, really appreciated on behalf, especially of the Bank of Ambazonia. So, JC, thank you also for, summarizing a few details there from the previous speakers. And there's a lot like Professor Agbo stated. It's just a start, and we're going to continue with this process as we move on. But the key aspects that, we can draw from this is that, the currency issue is basically linked to economics. And for economics to work and, for everything to actually, for a country, for the GDP of a country to grow, you need businesses to operate. Some of the speakers actually, stated that very clearly by actually linking that to the problem of liquidity. We haven't got enough liquidity in the system, and so people do not have enough money or maybe even capital to start a business. And so we rely totally on importations of goods and services. And of course, those importations are of goods that are meant for, the tertiary sector or maybe the secondary sector. And we've totally missed also on the part that, the primary sector is very, very key, which is a sector that actually leads to, development of small businesses. So as Professor Ali Zafa stated, we missed that point. And, that's one of the key aspects that, we're taking from this, that aspect of, a monetary system being able to provide liquidity that can create, businesses that can actually make people become richer and grow economically, increase the GDP of a country and so on. And also, that aspect of credibility that, Professor Herman and, Professor Amin, they've all stated that. I think it's very key. The networks that, are developed internationally, especially, that's something that we should be looking at. And as Ambassador Nash stated, it is an issue of, first of all, collaborating, having that sense of, and Professor Herman also pointed this very clearly, trust, because it's trust that actually drives everything. That basically it's an intellectual capital stuff, that it's a legal tender. When I'm taking a good from you, it's a promise to pay. It's not basically, a payment. It's just a paper, as we state. So the aspect of actually creating an Ambazonia currency relies on that trust, first of all, and the fact that, we can build institutions that people can trust, and also, we can actually be able to, put ourselves together, build networks internationally, and create, a system where everyone will be able to live a better life and, stay off this path of relying on France or relying on other people for our development. So there's a lot that has been taken down, and, I think that should lead now to, us. The conference is still on, but, we'll be following up on some of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ambi. And we want to let our audience know that there will be a conference proceeding that will be published in a document, and all the contributions will be synthesized in a post-conference document that will be circulated and will become kind of a blueprint for future conversations on this topic. We have not elapsed the conversation, we're barely introducing the conversation. So we want to also mention quickly, before I hand it over to JC to wrap up this conference, I want to quickly thank the following people who have worked very hard for this conference. There are Comrade BD Concepts, Comrade Vivian, of course, Comrade Dr. Azafo, and all the members of the organizing committee who have worked tirelessly to get this conference work. We want to thank you all, and the support of the Southern Cameroon International Town Hall also. And we cannot forget to mention our able friend and comrade VP Jerima, who personally threw his weight behind this conference. That needs to be recognized. And our board chairman, Dr. Ako Asana. We want to thank you all for doing this, and we believe this is beginning to signal that we have the human capital to build institutions and to build a successful and prosperous country. Well, on that note, I'm going to turn it over to JC, and you will not hear from me again. JC will lead. Thank you. Over.
And on that note, Professor Akbo, you are fired. All right, everyone. Yeah, so it's been awesome so far. Thank you, Professor Amin, Herman, and Emmanuel for those. Sorry, Dr. Dr. Emmanuel Herman. Thank you so much for coming in there. And like Professor Agbo says, this is a tip of the iceberg. This is an introduction of what we want to do, of things we're thinking of doing, and we need to continue having those conversations. So before I call in the leaders to give us a word or two, there is a conference statement that I would like to read. It is imperative that we leave the conference having at the back of our minds what it is, what is the core takeaway of this conference, the value of this conference. So the statement goes, if the century-long record of historical grievances and marginalization of Southern Cameroonians, aka Ambazonians, isn't enough justification to question the legitimacy of a one Cameroon agenda proposed and defended by the Cameroon government, the scale of developmental impediment posed by the CFA franc arrangement after Cameroon government used the CFA to subsume the pound-based booming economy of Southern Cameroon makes an even more compelling case for Ambazonian independence from both Cameroon and France's neo-imperialism. This is to tell you we had a strong economy in the 50s. If anyone knows anything about what was going on before French Cameroon came and killed everything we had one of the best growing, one of the highest growing and developing economies in Africa in the 50s. And it was because we had a currency to go with, a currency that was not controlled by La Republique, a currency that was not controlled by France, a currency that was controlled by the market and not by any particular government or colonizer. So that is the conference statement. Now I'm going to move on in the interest of time and call the leaders to give their statement. So Comrade VP Yerima, if you can come up first, then I'll move on from there. And you each have a maximum of 3 minutes to give your statement. Sorry, we have to time that because we do not want to keep people longer than we have already. Comrade Yerima, VP Yerima. I don't think we can hear you, Comrade VP of the interim government. I don't think we
thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, that's good. You guys are controlling everything, so I cannot control on my side. So, well, I want to thank you, Comrade Jess and Comrade Agbo, for the wonderful work you both done to coordinate this conference. But first, I really want to extend my gratitude to Professor Alois and Professor Herman, Ambassador Thibault Nagy, and other members of the panel who have really, really contributed in this conference. And I believe that all of us who are partakers of this and present to listen and learn have really learned a lot today. We understand that the CFA is a foreign currency that wants to hold us hostage. But we will not accept that. And it's something that in our fight for the liberation of Ambazonia, we knew about this and we thought that it was worthwhile for us to create the Bank of Ambazonia, to be able to work with experts like those that we've listened to today to see that we establish an Ambazonian currency. As we've listened today, we see that in order to achieve this, we need a lot of friends to achieve this. And I believe in our process of fighting for our liberation, that is just what we are doing. So with the foresight that we had in creating to maintain the Bank of Ambazonia and the currency of Ambazonia, the issue was to maintain our identity and making sure that we keep away from the colonial currency that is struggling in all ways to hold us tight and make us the slaves of La République du Cameroon. But the world is changing and changing very fast. And that's one of the things that we gathered tonight from these wonderful panelists. The fourth industrial revolution is here. And I believe that with that, we, even the bank, should understand that we need to meet up with the fast pace of digitalization, which has to go with AI and machine learning, and see how we can incorporate this in the banking system of a new Ambazonia. So our bank, which is the Bank of Ambazonia, and which we created as the central bank of Amazonia to serve all Amazonians, must make sure that they use the opportunity of the moment to making sure that they meet up with the standards of this fast pace that the fourth industrial revolution has gotten us to. So all of us know that we need this bank, and we want the Bank of Ambazonia to succeed. We need the bank. And as the panelist said, it's a work in progress. And I just want to encourage all of us that this is one aspect in our revolution that we need to throw our weight behind it, whether from from all stakeholders within the Ambazonian quest for freedom. This is an opportunity that we've created for ourselves. And I believe that at this moment, and listening to our panelists, all of us must throw our weight behind the bank and make it successful so that we can come up with make the Bank of Ambazonia to be our central bank and make sure that we come out with an Ambazonian currency. It is not going to be a walk in the park, but I believe that with dedication, resilience, and focus, we can do this. And I know that we are a people who can do wonderful things when we put our minds on them. And I believe that we are ready right now to trust this institution, the Bank of Ambazonia, to take us to another level where we can call the Bank of Ambazonia our central bank with a currency. And this should not only be the only strong institutions in Ambazonia, but as a collective, we should start thinking of creating stronger institutions for our nation, because we know that Ambazonia is a new nation that will be birthed in Africa. We're a nation, we'll continue to be one, and we'll make sure that we are recognized as a people. And we need strong institutions. And we should also take into cognizance the fast pace in which the world is changing, making sure that we can inculcate this in every area of our quests for our freedom. We are ready. And we should be thinking about smart cities. We should be thinking about smart banking systems. We should be thinking about smart homes. We should be thinking about making use of modern technologies in every area of our liberation, of our quest for our liberation. And we don't need to wait that it is after we are liberated before we are going to do this. And the process will do that. And the Bank of Ambazonia is testament to one of those kind of strong institutions that we need for posterity, we need for the livelihood of our nation. And I believe that when we come together and reason together, work together, trust one another, I believe one of the biggest words that I would call it biggest words that we heard tonight was the issue of trust. We need to come to a point where we can trust ourselves and do the work that is necessary for us to become a nation and to become and restore our identity as a people, and making sure that we fight together to free homeland. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vice President Daphne Yerima of the Ambazonian Intergovernment. Those were some great words there. We are more than capable and more than ready to do these things, and thanks to institutions like the Bank of Ambazonia. So moving on, we are going to move on to Dr. Cho Ayaba of the Ambazonian Governing Council. So Dr. Cho, if you're still with us, welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone, the intellectuals. Mr. Vice President, thanks to meet you here, the chair of the CNC, and the great speakers. Thanks for having me in your midst, and I am grateful to make a short contribution. I think the Bank of Ambazonia is an innovation, and I take my cue from, I think, the impeccable words of Comrade JC when she submitted an argument for such an endeavor in the words aspirational. We have informed our people who the enemy is. We have told them exactly the method we are going to use to dismantle the enemy. We have not really been clear on the alternative set of institutions we want to put in place that will make Ambazonia different from Cameroon. And I think the coinage aspirational is pivotal in defining the ways that we would build our country. And the cream of intellectuals that have been stitched together is also a communication to the international system that we are taking seriously the prospect of an independent Ambazonia that is going to be able to integrate within an international system and become a harbinger for stability and continuity. This cream of persons is an insurance policy to the international system. And I'm extremely excited And I hope that the institutionalization process of our liberation is built on a strong foundation, and being here today is a testament to the consultative approach which we need going forward. And I hope that we will continue in this spirit. The second comment I would like to make is that raised by Mr. Tibonagi, I'm sorry, Ambassador Tibonagi, that of justice. I think the French, the CFR, its army, and the institutions that it has implanted within Ambazonia and other countries have been the source of the greatest injustice in the Gulf of Guinea. Establishing an Ambazonian currency is not simply an ideal or a necessity, but also is a liberation tool. Our forebears thought political independence was going to guarantee the structural and institutional framework for prosperity. It failed woefully. We need economic independence. We need political independence. We need to be able to shape our future based on our contextual reality. And the other professor talked about the mode of exchange, and another speaker talked about ask if the CFI is a currency or a medium of exchange. This is not our field as leaders, but I call upon all of you to look at this very seriously, extremely very seriously. If we need a new Ambazonia, we need a new way of thinking. We must dismantle all of the existing structures that have been put in place. And that takes me to the next speaker, I think Professor Azar, when he talks about a developmental vision versus a dependency vision. I hope to God Almighty that you, the intellectuals sitting here today, will act in the spirit of the intellectuals of India. That if your head goes through the guillotine, the next intellectual puts the head through the guillotine. So far, Ambazonian intellectuals have perpetuated a dependency vision because they've allied themselves with the structures of curtailment established by the same colonial system that we assembled here to dismantle its currency. And I hope in discussing the currency of Ambazonia, it shouldn't simply remain an intellectual affair. I'm a grassroots leader, and being here means the grassroots is taken care of. And that we must have a conversation at every level. And I don't think we should duplicate what you people are doing. We should reinforce it. And for that to happen, the conversation must begin. And I pray to God Almighty we succeed in this endeavor. Don't only see it as what Comrade Jesse has talked about as aspirational. See it as a tool to communicate to the world, to our people, and to those who've robbed us of dignity. That establishing ours is going to be a weapon we use against them. I wish you good luck and thanks for having me on the platform.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cho Ayaba, President of the Ambazonian Governing Council. Always a pleasure listening to you talk. As you heard from him, it is a tool because remember, whatever affects our people, if we can use that to disengage our relationship, our so-called first relationship with our republic, if we can use that to cut off ties with our republic, it is a necessary tool in the revolution. And the currency is just one of such with far-reaching goals and objectives that we can achieve as a result of it. So Dr. Choyaba, thank you so much. While I'm waiting for Bridget Abile to come in and speak for Takumbang, I am going to go. No, I wanted SCNC to speak last because It is the founder, it is the organization from which we all sprung from. So I wanted SCNC to go last on this and give its remark last. So Comrade Prizo, just bear with me. You're the father in the house. So you're going to go last before the chairman closes. And we do not have so much time. So I am going to go on and speak for the Southern Cameroon Women's League. The chair lady, Comrade Irene, was supposed to be here. Dr. Irene Alowede was supposed to be here, but she has unfortunately been called just before this. So she asked me to give a word for the Southern Cameroon Women's League. And to just echo what the previous two leaders have spoken, I think the Southern Cameroon Women's League is also of the opinion that revolutions are not fought from just one angle. Revolutions have multiple angles from which you fight and win. And it doesn't matter what angles are. If those angles have short-term benefit, medium-term benefit, and long-term benefit, those are the things we have to be looking at. Whatever tool we as Ambazonians can put in place today that will help us achieve our overall objective of independence and will help us put in place a system for an awesome development focusing on modern Ambazonia. That is the belief that SCAWL holds as the right way to look at. While we do the groundwork, while we do diplomacy, while we do we take care of human rights issues, taking care of economic issues is just as crucial, as well as cultural and other ways that we need to look at. So as Southern Cameroon's Women's League, we do applaud the Bank of Ambazonia for putting this together. We are willing to work with the bank in whatever capacity that we can to ensure that endeavors like this, and I agree with Dr. Choyaba, should not just be aspirational, but should be maximized as a tool in the revolution and as a tool for a forward-thinking Ambazonia in the future. So the league stands with the bank and all those that have worked hard to do this, the IG, the EGOVC, and it's looking, this is an endeavor that will take every single one of us to partake in and make sure it is a success. So the Women's League is looking forward to working with the bank and congratulating the bank on starting the conversation, and that we pray we continue to do this and it just doesn't fizzle out. So thank you. So that is a Southern Cameroon's Women's League. I see Comrade Prizo, you know I'm reserving you for last, so I'm going to go right away and call for Comrade Bridget Abile, who is here representing Takumbeng. So Comrade Bridget, if you can just give us a word from Takumbeng for 2 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. You can unmute now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so very much for all the panelists, the organizers, the moderators. You guys have done a very marvelous job. I think this first conference is a very big success, and I hope that this is just a beginning of one of the conferences. As the other speakers have spoken, that getting this is one of the tools that we can use to liberate ourselves, to disconnect ourselves from La République. As we have all heard, that the France were using it as in those nations for non-developmental purpose, instead to be for those nations to be developed. So I think we as the Takumbos, we strongly support this initiative. It's a very good one, and we are praying and hoping that Ambazonia will not kill this good initiative, and they will instead take opportunity to learn so that we can come up with what is best for our homeland, with respect to our economic freedom and for our territorial freedom as well. So I pray that let's continue to work together. Takumbang will work hand in hand, making sure that this initiative comes to fruitfulness. Count on us, and anything that you want us, the Takumbang, to do, we will gladly be available to assist in that dimension. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Comrade Bridget. I really appreciate you and Takumbang for coming forward and supporting this initiative. So the women are always there. We know a good thing when we see it. So kudos to Southern Cameroon's Women's League and Takumbang for always looking out for what is best for homeland and for supporting it in every way possible. So we're going to call on Comrade Agbo Prizo, who is here representing the SCNC. So, Comrade Prizo, if you can please, we all know SCNC, that's the father of all organizations. So we continue to give you that respect. And if you can close the closing remarks before the chairman comes in, that would be great.
Thank you, Comrade JC. I want to thank your great professionalism with Dr. Agbo in the way you have presented the speakers. I think it is something we're going to write home with. I wish that you continue this way and present many of our conferences so that we do, others will learn from it and it will create an impact. I want to mostly thank the opinion leaders that made it today, Dr. Cho, and all the other leaders that have come here to support this great initiative. Not forgetting the great speakers, these luminaries who have given us a good insight of what we are expecting tomorrow by getting this, our amber currency. And then our organizers who have made it possible for all of us to come here and see. We thank you very much for this initiative. We know, like the VP has said, it's work in progress. And I want to thank the VP himself for just having that insight to come up with something like the Bank of Ambazonia. Today, I think in the past years, we thought it was an error. Today, we can sit back and say, after listening to these great minds, I think we can say it was a great revelation. And like Dr. Cho said, it is now time that all of us put our hands together and see it work. Having listened to these great minds, I think I picked out a few things I want to touch. These things are the negativity of the CFA. It is a tool of colonization, a tool of underdevelopment, and might be another way of really subjugating the countries under it to a kind of psychological torture, and in which you stock money and come back to borrow the same money. I think seeing these negativities, we are left with one thing. We'll go back to what one of the speakers said. An emergency state cannot start without her own currency. But the question has remained, like he also said, is it just a ride in the park, like Dr. Shea asked? No. He also highlighted a lot of difficulties that we need to face. One of them is having people to recognize the currency. This ties up with our quest. And that's what I think our own speaker, I think that was Professor Herman, linked the two, telling us that this quest for the amber currency is also linked to the quest of our freedom. Because the very partners we need today to support us to win this fight will be the same partners who will recognize our currency and make it a legal tender that can permit us to exchange within nations. So these are the aspects we have picked. And now that leaves us with a lot of responsibility. It is not an easy task, yes, but we can do it like the others have said. And what is this responsibility? It means that all of us from all walks of life and all factions of this struggle need now to come together and consider the Bank of Ambazonia as our bank and start building it like we all have said. It might take us some time, like one of the speakers said, it takes years to get this realized. But we have this time and have the possibility to do it. If we come up together, start projecting on many other things like the VP Eremas talked about, roads, road infrastructures, all our hospitals and more. But all of this cannot function without a proper financial system. And this financial system can only pass through a bank which we want to be considered tomorrow as a central bank. And that's why I'm calling on each and every one of us to go back, because I know it's a long journey, a journey of deep thinking, but we need to go back. By the next time the conveners will call us here, we should be coming with prospective ideas on how we will realize this project and realize it differently, learning from the mistakes of those who have started before us, so that we, as a unique people that we are, will have this project a unique one. Thank every Ambazonian that has commented, even in the chat, because your questions permitted the speakers to guide us on these things.
Absolutely.
So I thank all of you and wish that as we move, let's consider one thing. We have one Ambazonia. And that means if one sector fails, all of us have failed. If one person failed, we have all failed. We will either win together or lose together. It's high time we start thinking about us and not me. Thank you, and God bless everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prizo, there representing SCNC as always. Always glad to hear from you. So, ladies and gentlemen, not to waste too much time, we'll get a word of thanks from the chairman of the board of the Bank of Ambazonia. Dr. Asana, over to you.
Thank you, Comrade Jess. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Board of Governors of the Bank of Ambazonia, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all of you for joining us today. In fact, Dr. Agbo expressed our gratitude to a vast number of people. We would like to say both to those who were named and to those who remain unnamed that we thank you. We thank you for making this conference possible. We appreciate the sacrifices of all in this struggle, and especially all those who in one way or the other left their regular responsibilities to join us in today's conference. This is the intellectual nationalism that our speakers were talking about. Very often we focus on the limitations that we as a people have. Sometimes we focus on the sad stories, and all those stories deserve to be told. Today is an example that highlights that it's time for us to also focus on where we are doing things well. For example, very few people have been able to tell our story that our leadership came together to plan for the Canadian conference, that when they went to Canada, they provided a unified front, and the world was surprised. In fact, even La République du Cameroon crumbled, they shivered, and they collapsed in the face of an Ambazonian unity. Our unity is our biggest strength. That is why today, the motto of this bank is Unite and Conquer. This conference, fellow Ambazonians, is also an example of that unity. We've had VP Yerima, we've had the Honorable Comrade Cho Ayaba, and we've had the Honorable Comrade Agbo Prizo, representing the diversity that we have within our Ambazonian liberation struggle. And now we have also exhibited that it's time. It's time for us to start talking about the future of Ambazonia. It's time for us to start talking about a future currency. It's time for us to ask that question. Will a future Ambazonia have 3 states? Or will the 13 counties be converted into states? Those things have to be discussed in detail by organizing conferences and workshops such as this one.
15 seconds.
Before I end, permit me to say very briefly something about the Bank of Ambazonia. This bank represents or has delegates from all the 13 counties of Ambazonia.
10 seconds.
Open to all Ambazonians. And the bank has reorganized itself and created various branches that are available to help us. Please reach out to the bank's website and contact us for additional information on how we can be of service to you. Once again, thank you all for joining us. May God bless Ambazonia, and may God bless its children wherever they may be.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, everybody. We are right on time, and it was an absolute pleasure. We will be organizing more of these, and please stay with us. Stay tuned.